All right, let's dive right into this explainer. And to do that, we're plunging straight into the dark, freezing, and honestly incredibly choppy waters of the Arabian Sea on December 8, 1971. Picture the scene for a second. It's midnight, the air is bitterly cold, the sea is completely, overwhelmingly pitch black, and out there in the void, this secret maritime chess match is about to unfold. We're looking at Operation Python. It's one of the most daring, highly classified naval strikes in modern military history, and reading through the sources, it genuinely plays out like a high-tension cinematic thriller.
So, what actually happens when you strike an enemy's most guarded fortress in absolute total darkness? I mean, think about the global context of 1971. The world's attention was almost entirely fixed on the visible chaos of the war, right? You had massive dogfights tearing through the daytime sky, heavy armor divisions rolling across dusty borders. But while everyone was looking at the land and the air, a completely different, totally covert kind of war was brewing out on the open water. This wasn't just some random skirmish. It was a calculated, incredibly high-stakes operation executed entirely under the suffocating cover of night.
The historical sources we're examining describe the Indian Navy missile boats used that night with a very specific, kind of chilling phrase, silent predators. Imagine a small, incredibly agile, and exceptionally fast vessel cutting violently through the waves, but somehow remaining entirely undetected by state-of-the-art surveillance. The tactical goal here wasn't just to engage the enemy in open water where the odds might be even. The objective was way more daring than that. It was to willingly sail right into the opponent's absolute strongest, most heavily fortified coastal fortress and make a definitive, war-altering statement.
Let's move on to the fortress itself and the massive stakes involved.
We're basically entering Act 1 of this historical thriller, set right at the absolute peak of the conflict. To really grasp the sheer gravity and the audacity of Operation Python, we have to look at what was actually on the line. Karachi Harbor wasn't just your standard commercial port. No, it was a terrifyingly well-guarded coastal fortress, absolutely bristling with heavy batteries and radar arrays. But more critically, it was the beating heart of the opposing war machine. It was the central lifeline pumping vital fuel and massive reserves of ammunition to the Pakistani forces. The source material emphasizes a stark tactical reality here. If the fortress of Karachi fell, and if that lifeline was severed, the enemy's logistical artery would essentially bleed out and the whole war would end much, much faster.
Just look at the lightning-fast, almost unbelievable pace of these events. The Indian Navy had already launched a massive, highly successful initial strike called Operation Trident just 4 days prior, on December 4th. And because of that first strike, the Pakistani Navy actually thought they were relatively safe. They assumed there was absolutely no way the Indian Osha-class missile boats would possess the sheer audacity to return to the hornet's nest so soon. But, well, the job wasn't completely finished. The massive critical fuel tanks at Kiamari were still standing. So, leveraging that false sense of security, the immediate launch of Operation Python was greenlit for December 8th.
Which brings us to the actual chess match.
The planning and the physical approach of the Indian task force were, quite frankly, a covert intelligence masterpiece. You've got this small, highly specialized task force led by the frigate INS Talwar and the missile boat INS Vinash, creeping toward a hostile coast. The sources detail a scenario that just drips with cinematic tension. The crews were operating under total, absolute radio silence. Not a single word broadcast. There were 0 navigation lights on the vessels. They were functionally invisible. The crews were navigating blindly in a claustrophobic blackout, guided through deadly waters by literally nothing but the eerie, sweeping green glow of their radar screens, just searching for enemy steel.
And then, a blip. The sweeping radar detects a grouping of ships huddled near the coast. There is absolutely 0 hesitation from the commanders. At exactly 11 p.m., the suffocating midnight silence of the Arabian Sea is violently, irreversibly shattered. The INS Vinash unleashes 4 screaming Styx missiles into the night sky. The contrast between the dead, dark silence of the stealth approach and the sudden, roaring, explosive force of those rocket engines is the pivotal climax of this strike. The silent predator had suddenly, terrifyingly, snapped its jaws.
The sources refer to the fallout of this as Khuni Kale, or the bloody game.
Khuni Kale is how historical records describe the immediate, overwhelming, cascading devastation that followed the launch. Look at the terrifying, methodical precision of these strikes. We can trace the damage chronologically. 1. A direct, catastrophic hit on the vital Kiamari harbor fuel tanks, instantly igniting millions of gallons of oil. 2. A merchant ship heavily laden with high explosive ammunition is struck, causing massive secondary detonations. 3. A Pakistani naval tanker is completely obliterated. The tactical brilliance detailed in our sources is just staggering. 3 distinct, war-critical targets methodically eliminated in a matter of agonizing moments.
Now get this, 60 miles. The sources note that the sky over Karachi didn't just light up from these explosions, it turned a deep, horrific blood red. The massive, towering fires erupting from the Kumari oil farm were so unimaginably vast, so apocalyptic in scale, that the swirling flames and thick black smoke were clearly visible from a staggering 60 miles away out at sea. It was a definitive checkmate. It was a moment where the opposing side suddenly looked up at a burning sky and realized they had absolutely no moves left on the board.
And that leads directly to the sheer chaos and friendly fire that followed. You can only imagine the absolute blinding panic that gripped this heavily guarded fortress as it burned under the night sky. The historical records highlight a striking, almost tragic contrast between the two sides in the aftermath. On one side, you have the Indian sailors, icy, calm, incredibly professional. They executed their jobs perfectly, turned their ships around in the pitch black, and made a silent, utterly untraceable escape back into the ocean. On the exact opposite side, you have the Pakistani coastal defense experiencing a total breakdown of command. The panic was so absolute that in their shock and confusion, the defenders actually began firing their massive coastal guns at their own remaining ships and facilities. The chaos was complete.
Ultimately, this all culminated in the historic surrender.
We really need to understand the massive, rippling strategic fallout of this fiery night. With the harbor effectively paralyzed and burning completely out of control, the enemy's maritime capabilities were entirely crippled. But the effects went way beyond the water. The fuel that was supposed to keep their army tanks rolling across the borders, the fuel meant to keep their fighter planes flying in those intense dogfights, it literally turned to thick black smoke in the sky. Operation Python didn't just win a single naval skirmish, it systematically choked and dismantled the logistical backbone of the entire opposing military force.
And that systemic collapse brings us to this incredibly massive, staggering number, 93,000. Combined with the relentless, crushing pressure from the Army and the Air Force on land, the total, suffocating paralysis caused by daring naval operations like Python led directly to the historic surrender on December 16, 1971. That is just 8 days after the night Karachi burned. 93,000 soldiers laid down their arms, cementing this campaign as one of the most successful, flawlessly executed combined military operations in modern recorded history.
What's really fascinating is how the source material frames this operation. It wasn't just a successful military mission, it was the birth of what the text refers to as the New India mindset. It's a fundamental shift in strategic doctrine. It's the steadfast belief that no wall is too thick and no enemy harbor is too heavily guarded. It's the tactical mindset of willingly entering the opponent's strongest house under the cover of darkness to finish the job completely and leave them with absolutely zero moves left to play. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative question drawn directly from the sources. Does the New India strategic mindset we see debated and analyzed today truly have its deepest, most foundational roots right here, in these incredibly cinematic 1971 maritime legends? It is absolutely fascinating to think about how a single, explosive night in the freezing, dark waters of the Arabian Sea continues to ripple outward, shaping modern tactical doctrines decades later. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history that quietly shapes our world today.